We are live! Oh my gosh. Okay, welcome everybody to our live show. This is our first ever Name of the Book Club live show, which is very exciting. Joining me today, I have Elspeth and Jean, some of our lovely, lovely hosts, and this is the book that we're going to be discussing today, Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. And I'm hoping it's showing the right way because for me it's back to front, so I'm assuming it's okay for you guys.
You're all good.
Amazing. So welcome everybody. Hello. Oh my gosh. Very exciting. So I think to begin, we will start out with a non-spoilery section in case any of you haven't yet read the book or finished it. And then we will jump into some more spoilery discussions, but we will give you a bit of a warning before we get into all that. So if any of you guys have any questions you want to ask us specifically as well, you're more than welcome to leave some comments in the live chat thingy, and we'll get to those at some point as well. And we will have some discussion points that we'd love to hear your thoughts on too. So without further ado, let's jump in with some spoiler-free thoughts. Els, would you like to kick it off with a star rating and what you thought of the book?
Yes. Okay, so I double-checked this 5 minutes ago. I gave it 3 stars. I keep forgetting that I gave it 3 stars, so that's
interesting.
Yeah.
What does that say?
I quite enjoyed it. I feel like it's very much a product of its time, but we'll get into that a bit later. So yeah, 3 stars for me means I can see the flaws in it, but I did enjoy the experience of reading it, and I might read further on. But I am still trying to decide. What I really liked about it was that it is very political. It's a political fantasy. Emphasis on the political, not on the fantasy.
Yep. Not yet, anyway.
Yeah, generally 3 stars. Liked it. Yeah, that's a start.
Awesome. Jean, what did you think of the book?
All right, so I'm a bit of a black sheep when it comes to the book, and I gave it 2 stars. I was really not a fan of it because of spoilers.
Yeah. We'll get into that in a little bit.
Yeah. I just found it to be a depressing book. There was a lot of political intrigue. There was a lot of world building, and I really needed to get motivated to read this book because it just was so slow with the pacing. And yeah, but because of those spoilers, which I will go into in a little while, I just really didn't like it.
Yep. Fair enough. I can hear myself. I think on Jean, I can hear myself. My voice.
Oh, really?
Yeah, could you maybe try pop some headphones in? I think your microphone's catching the live show. This happens to me all the time. Thanks, Jade. Sorry. Okay, so my thoughts on the book. I gave it about a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I did enjoy it, and I did really like all of the political intrigue, but it definitely was slower in pace. There was kind of more of the world building in terms of the politics, not so much on the magic yet. And I did just find it to be a really foundational book. So it's setting up, I think, for more books in the series. So I think it's probably a necessary book, but because there isn't a huge amount of action until later on, it wasn't the most exciting book. So not a complete amazing, blowing me out of the water book, but I did enjoy it. So yeah, those
Which
are my
is not
thoughts.
unusual in a lot of fantasy. Here's what I prepared earlier that has a similar problem. The Gunslinger by Stephen King, I feel like it has the same thing. It's very foundational. It's not so much plot driven.
Yeah, well, that's one that I'm hoping to get to at some point. But when I did mention that I wanted to read it, people were like, "Oh, the first one sucks." I'm like, "Oh gosh, that's making me so excited to read it now." But luckily, it's like a short book, so
It's good though. It's just.
I kind of love how everyone had really different thoughts about it, which was really cool.
Yeah.
Because at our book club, so we had our meets yesterday in Brisbane and Sydney.
Yay!
But yeah, we're like, who loved it? And 50% of the group put their hands up, and then who hated it, and 50% put their hands up. So it was actually quite good for a discussion.
Yeah. I think for us as well, we had one person that rated it 5 stars. I think a lot of people were kind of in the middle of the road, 3, a couple of 4 stars, but a lot of them were kind of we enjoyed it, but this X, Y, and Z didn't make me love it. It gets better with the other two in the trilogy, says Wedler Mello. So that's exciting to hear. That's what I was kind of thinking might happen, that after this, like, a lot of foundation and world building happening in the first book, then we'll kind of jump more into some of the other exciting bits. So would you guys continue with the series?
All right, so I was actually saying before, I went on Wikipedia to look up spoilers.
Oh my gosh.
To see if it was worth it. And it looks like some interesting stuff does happen, but I found it depressing. I don't know if I would read it immediately or even continue with this trilogy, but I might pick up one of the other series and see how that goes.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I've heard some great things about some of the other series as well. So, but I am planning on like reading them in chronological like publication order and going through all of the trilogies or series. I'm not sure if there's more than 3 books in each of them, but anyway, it's a big commitment though.
Oh yeah.
I think I'm more inclined to read the series after the discussion. So before we met up, I was going, oh, like maybe if I feel like it, but right now I just don't have the time. But now that we've really gotten into it, I'm kind of interested to see where it goes.
Yeah. Well, that's what I really love about book clubs and having these discussions about books and getting other people's perspectives. It's just such an interesting insight into other like reactions to the books and other people's thoughts and like things that happen. So yeah, just like even if it's not all absolutely positive, because like there was a lot of critiquing that we did with the book, it did get me more excited to read more and see how it will progress, what will improve, those sorts of things. So very excited about that.
Yeah, like for me in particular, I really want to see Fitz get his revenge against some of the other characters, especially since this book was harsh. Like, I'm like, it's so bloody depressing, and everyone's just like doing something to him, and I'm like, stop.
Yeah.
I think I'm less concerned about his revenge and more concerned about his personality. Or
and having one.
I'd really like to see him get one of those.
Yeah, he is a very passive character. I think we might start diving into some spoilers. I feel like we might get a bit carried away. So just a bit of a warning, we're probably going to start getting to some spoiler territory for any of you watching that haven't read it. If you don't want to be spoiled, perhaps don't continue watching. If you don't mind, or if you have read the book, then please proceed. But yes, the passive character.
Yes.
Not uncommon.
Yeah. Yeah, you were talking about this yesterday. A really good point, actually.
Sorry, did you want me to take that? I have a lot.
Elaborate.
Let's go.
I have a lot of thoughts about the way in which characters, particularly main characters, function. I am an academic. Like, I literally criticize stuff like as a career. So I have a lot of thoughts. So one of the really interesting things that I've noticed about protagonists, especially in fantasy fiction, is they're usually either passive or active. So there's a big appeal, and the big example of this is Harry Potter in having a passive main character, because it makes it, to an extent, more accessible for the reader to jump into that headspace and go, well, you could do this or you could do this. If the character is passive, if stuff is happening to them and not by them, then there's more option for the reader to connect with them in a sense, because the reader has no control about what's happening in the book. So if they're reading a passive character, it's a lot easier to substitute for that. But also it creates a lot more, I guess, conflict, for want of a better word, because the reader, I found a lot of the time while reading this book, while reading Fitz, I kept going, but you could do something better here. You could do this completely different thing, and it would actually help move the story along. It would help do all sorts of things, but we can't always know, I guess, when a character is going to hit that point. And I think there's a really interesting balance between the passive character who serves as a vehicle for the audience and the active character who serves as a vehicle for the plot. And I feel like Fitz definitely falls into the former category here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was interesting because while reading the book, I found that Fitz himself, like he was obviously he didn't have much of a personality. You know, he's a lonely boy. He's really young. He
was
obviously,
very isolated as well, which does
yeah.
say a lot about how his development goes.
Yeah, and I found like the reason why we wanted to keep on reading was because we wanted to know whether, you know, good things will happen to him. We wanted to know whether he climbs out of his loneliness. And while I was reading, I'm like, you know what? If this was written from the perspective of like chivalry or patience or one of the other royal brothers, I would have really loved it because those were the people who I wanted to know more about because I felt like there was so much interest and intrigue happening there. But Fitz, because he's sort of on the outside, you only see pieces of it, which was interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I definitely think like Fitz, I would never say that Fitz is one of my favorite characters. There are so many other characters like Lady Patience and the Fool, and even Verity towards the end, I was starting to really, really like his character because at the start it was kind of like iffy, like I didn't think anything negative of him, but he did become more interesting towards the end. So yeah, it is interesting with having such a kind of passive character that doesn't do a whole lot and we aren't really as invested in his story, but kind of more about what the other characters are doing. But maybe that is also a way for us as the reader to feel more like an observer and kind of try and guess at what the other characters are about, what their motivations are, having a bit more mystery there as well, maybe.
I think that's also where it comes back into the politics. So for the first half of the novel, which is pretty much the hardest part of it to get through because so little happens, he is very much a tool in the politics of the world. And the reason, I mean, narrative-wise, the reason that he doesn't really have a say in anything is because he's just a product of a corrupt system in many ways. He is the bastard child of someone who is pushed out of power because of his existence. Fitz has no control over the fact that he exists or what happens to him because he's, what, 5? When
the book 6, I think.
5
yeah, really, really
6 to 14, yeah.
Everyone, all the adults in his life use him as a political tool to further their own. And that's a big part. And I mean, that's I guess why I found the book so interesting to start off with, because he, that's what the politics of the book are initially. They're the fact that there's this child who has no control and who has no say in the way the world works and the way his life works, but he's constantly being used by all sorts of people for all sorts of things. And you see it again when Lady Patience shows up as well. Though her motivations are quite different, her use of him is buying into that same structure, that same world structure in which he doesn't exist for his own advancement. He exists for the advancement of everyone else. He's nothing. That's why he has no personality.
It was funny because at the book club yesterday, a few people mentioned like it was Jon Snow 2.0 story, like if he was young. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so true.
Oh my gosh.
How good is that?
Oh, yeah. And I think it is really interesting as well, because obviously it makes a bit of sense why he is such a passive character and he is so naive, because he's so young at the start. And even though he's being used as a tool, it's not unknown to him. Like he's been, like Shrew told him from the start, like he's going to be used as a tool by the king and the princes and stuff like that. But he's kind of, too young to really understand the completeness of that and to really question it, I guess. But that's more so something that we do see towards the end of the book.
But because he was so young and such a passive character, did anyone else feel like this sense of helplessness and despair when it came to him? Because it's like every single person that he learns to trust or that he forms a connection with kind of screws him over in a way. And I just felt like it was just such a depressing read.
Yeah, it's not a heartwarming story.
Definitely not.
I mean, it's not the most depressing thing I've ever read.
No,
like, by a long shot. And I sort of felt like I guess that point does come down to your attitude, I guess, to the world. because I'm quite cynical and I sort of go on this basis of no one can be trusted because everyone's just out for them. And so applying that worldview to this book was really easy. It was just like, oh yeah, everyone's just screwing this kid over. Yep, that's expected.
Oh man, no, I'm obviously a bit more optimistic. So I was like, I hope he can trust Galen. I hope he can trust Jade.
Puppy.
Well, I was actually, I think this is, someone in the comments has kind of gone into this a little bit, because on the synopsis it's talking about how his tutor was kind of hoping to discredit and kill him from like the get-go. So when we started, I thought that was Jade from the get-go. So I'm just like waiting for Jade to do something or like turn around and completely stab him in the back. And then we meet Galen and I was like, oh, okay, this is the character that they're talking about. But I was just like constantly questioning everything that Jade did.
Yeah.
Based on the synopsis. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, and it's funny because, like, I think someone in the comments just mentioned that he's a really whiny character, which I have to agree with, because obviously all these things are happening to him and all he can do is whine because literally he's a child. But anyway, like, oh my gosh. But at certain points, like when he was getting trained by Galen and all these horrible training techniques happening to him and Galen was pretty much leaving him out to die, I was like, is it just in his head? Like is this actually happening to him, or is he just whining about it? And for me, it felt like there was a bit of that distrust with the character as well, because he had that sort of whiny presence. I'm like, are these things actually bad? Yeah. And then it reached a certain point, like I think when Galen leaves him out to die, I'm like, okay, all right, so it's not in his head purely.
Yeah, this is a little more concrete evidence that Galen's just out to get him or kill him, dispose of him however he can. Oh, yeah, Galen was an interesting one.
Yeah. And I'm like, why is he actually picking on him? Is it because he's a bastard, because he doesn't like him? And then you sort of find out. And then I'm like, okay, so this is actually a thing where people don't like Fitz and are trying to get rid of him.
Yeah. That's one thing that I always do question when you do come across characters that just seem to be all like out to get them and completely hate them to the core. I'm like, is there a reason here, or are they just like that character that's like poorly developed and kind of made to be this hateful thing for not really much reason? All right.
Alrighty, so we have some questions.
Lovely. I'm loving all of the discussions in the comments as well. Thank you for sharing all of your thoughts, everyone. The life of Fitz is so depressing. Yes, Grace, I know. It is quite depressing.
So people want to know about the Fool and what we thought of him. He was so interesting.
So interesting. Such a mysterious character.
Yes. I don't know where to start. Because I tabbed a lot. You can't actually see my tabs because they're yellow, so that was good planning. I was really interested by the Fool because they're, especially at the beginning of chapter 9, where there's this description that suggests that the Fool might be gender fluid. But also I'd really love to learn more about the Fool, but I'm also really concerned that little exchange of or maybe the Fool is gender fluid is just me going, oh well, maybe there is actually alternative representation in this, but I'm really concerned that I'll read on and it'll just be like, oh no, the Fool identifies as cisgender, whatever. That was just the Fool being tricky and mysterious, and I'm really concerned that that's going to become such a trivial thing.
No, I agree, because I thought the exact same thing. I thought that exchange was leading towards the conclusion that the Fool was gender fluid, so I'm very, very curious to see how it pans out. I hope it is a case that they are.
Yeah, because we sort of talked about a bit how this book was released like in the mid-90s, and how even today, like, it's still fairly relevant. Like, it has aged really, really well when it comes to that. And like, I found you know, regarding a lot of like other fantasy books written by male authors, there wasn't a lot of inherent sexism, and we wondered whether that was because there wasn't much focus given to the female characters, but because it's written by a female author as well. So that was kind of refreshing that you don't hear about, you know, bad things happening to females yet, but that's what I kind of liked about it.
Can I go on like a rant?
Yeah, go.
Because we actually had a great talk about this as well, because when I initially read it, I for people who don't know, I guess just a bit of background, my thesis is on gender narratives in fairy tale retellings. So I read a lot of gender theory. When I first finished the book, I went, oh, what a relief. It felt like an 80s fantasy novel in the style of like Feist, but no women were horribly assaulted or abused or used as disposable things. That being said, the women are not given much time on the page, and they're not as influential as the men. And someone yesterday in our Sydney discussion actually pointed out she found the treatment of women in the book really frustrating, and a lot of that for her was the fact that every throwaway line, every bit character, every single woman who was a throwaway line or a bit character was described as being shrill or silly,
giggling and things like that.
Yeah.
And I mentioned as well that Lady Patience, because she's not fertile, she's described at one point as being an invalid wife.
Yeah. Which
I also found to be a bit problematic. I was just like, red flag there. But yeah.
There's definitely a lot of internalized, I think there's a lot of internalized stuff here, but I'm also curious to know if the internalization of this sort of behavior and this sort of attitude is a result of the fact that the book feels very much like Hobb is trying to emulate the writers of the time who she would have been competing with.
Yeah, exactly.
A very tough competition for those who knew that Hobb is a woman. So we're talking about, you know, Raymond E. Feist, who frequently uses rape as a plot point.
Oh, man.
To further male development and stuff like that. And I can't remember who the other example I used yesterday was, aside from Feist. But I mean, Feist is a big one, so he's a good one.
Yeah.
George R. Martin.
Yeah. And that being said as well, someone in our discussion yesterday mentioned that she started reading the second book and that there is like descriptions of a raid which focuses a lot on women being abused and raped.
No!
Which is concerning. So I probably would skip over that part just because I feel like that'd be way too confronting. And she was saying it's like it's less focusing on like the men fighting and things like that. It's more about what was happening to the women in this raid, which is sad to hear.
And I was actually reading Goodreads reviews that said a lot of people didn't actually realize that Robin Hobb was a woman. So that could have been why it was such a male-dominated story, pretty much.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly, I think the one of our book club members who was talking about being frustrated about how women were portrayed, she went in thinking that Robin Hobb was a male. So she kind of had that perspective and attitude going into the book, and that's how she was reading the characters as well, with that expectation. So I think it's very interesting. Oh yeah, Carissa says, yes, that's true. I'm assuming this is about the start of the second book. It can be traumatizing with all of the...
Yeah, speaking of traumatizing, the whole reason why I hated scenes in the book that I found like really upsetting is the animal cruelty, and how there's these amazing, like there's at least 3 dog characters that are, you know, amazing, and they're loyal, and they're pretty much the only light in Fitz's day. They make friends with him, and you know, obviously being a dog person myself, I got really attached to them. But it's like with every single dog character, they end up dying, they end up being killed. Fair enough, like they felt like hero characters because they saved Fitz in the end. But I feel like killing off dogs is just like emotional manipulation to show how evil characters are. Like, I hated that. And I hated how nosy. It's like, oh, actually he is alive. And I'm like, guys, he's, the dog's actually alive. It's wonderful. And then before you know it, and I'm like, I was so angry.
Yeah.
On the book.
I was a little frustrated because I think it is used as kind of emotional manipulation, and I feel like it didn't really progress Fitz's character much either. Like, if it had been used as a tool, that's also one thing, but I feel like it didn't do too much because Birch was like so mad with him that he still continued to like connect with these dogs after what he thought had happened to Nosy originally.
Yeah.
And, like, originally when he thought that, like, Birch was even though Birch didn't kill Nosy, he was like hoping that having that distance would stop him from doing it. And then, yeah, I don't know.
I know. Did anyone else get really
so unnecessary?
I know. Did anyone else get really worried when Burridge took over looking after Fitz's puppy? I was like, what's he gonna do to him now?
Yes. I was like, oh my god.
I know. So I'm like, Fitz, just stay away from dogs. I don't care if you can talk to them. Like, just tell them not to go near you. Yeah. That was sad. I'm like, kill all the humans. I don't care. Even kill Fitz. Just leave Nosy alone, for fuck's sake.
Oh my god. They're just so precious and innocent, and they're not doing anything wrong. They're just being loving.
Yeah.
I don't know. I read that and went, oh, okay, he's a horrible person, moving on. And I didn't have this emotional reaction. And I mean, on the one hand, I am a cat person. No.
Someone did mention to me if it was cats in place of dogs, I would have been really upset. But because it was dogs,
I mean, I was rereading Nevernight last week, and there's animal cruelty in that one as well, except it's for a cat. But I had the exact same reaction because, again, I expect the worst of people. And I'm just like, yeah, okay, bye.
Your cold, dead heart was...
It's super dead.
Whereas here I am going, oh, it's a dog. Hopefully the dog will live. Oh, man.
I mean, in fantasy like this, I've sort of reached the point where I'm like, oh, it's a dog, so it's going to die in 2 chapters.
I'll never trust Robin Hobb again.
Never in the first place.
What did you guys think of the magic used in the novel? Like how there was skill, which is something that the royalty possesses, and then there's wit, which is like a pretty damn cool ability, but they're like, don't talk about it.
I'm so confused. Are they not the same thing?
No, wit lets them communicate with animals.
It is essentially the same thing, but like the skill is communicating telepathically with people, and then the wit is with animals. So, like, I mentioned this yesterday as well, but I was very confused at the start as to what skill was, because when it kind of went into a little more detail about the wit, it was saying how the skill is so very different. So I was like, oh, it must be like a completely different idea, not actually the same like telepathy, but just something different. So I was very confused, and I had to like look up what the skill was because it kept talking about it. I'm like, what is happening? I feel like it didn't go into quite enough detail. Like, I wanted to understand like the restraints and like what you can actually do with these different abilities in a little more detail.
Yeah, I would have really appreciated that. I mean, if you're gonna write a foundational novel, like, please go into the foundations of everything and not just one thing. Because I feel like, yeah, there was a lot of stuff about the politics of the world and the world itself, and that was great because I feel like I could read any book in the series now and not need a recap. Like, I have a full understanding of that, but it's supposed to be a fantasy novel. It would have been great to have that same treatment for the magic, and especially for Fitz's own relationship with it, because there was a sense that he was just blindly accepting what he was told, and there was this very minor rebellion when he continued to use the wit or whichever it was, but he recognized that he should keep it hidden and not communicate and not explore it in any way. I really would have liked to have seen some exploration of what the magic is and how it functions in the world and in the individual.
Yeah, because it was interesting how when Galen was like, oh, even though you're not born with skill, you can still learn it. But then it turns out, I could
that was
really
interesting
get that.
as well, because my impression was that it was like I think it was the Islanders that came to this 7 duchies. How do you pronounce it? Duchies? Anyway, it's part of the royal line. So I thought it was like a genetic thing. So I don't know.
I mean, maybe, but that was not clear. That needed.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the issue. The fact that we're so confused about it, I think it wasn't described clearly enough and kind of explained.
Yeah.
Like, I understand having some mystery, but this is just confusion.
Apparently it's explained a bit more in the second book, so...
Good. I love hearing that.
What did you guys think of the way it was written? Like, obviously he's a young child, but it's like when he's a bit like an old man and then he's looking back at his young life. Yeah. Whereas I'm like, how do you remember like exactly everything that you said and you did?
Yeah,
I always wonder that, but at the start as well.
Is that a part of the wit? Could we like have?
But at the start as well, especially with the first scene, what like his first memory, he's questioning if it's actually his memory that he's remembering so clearly, or if it's just stories that people have told about him being dropped off to chivalry. Because he was saying how I'm not sure if this is my memory or if it's just like everything I've remembered from other people's stories about my life.
Yeah, and wasn't there that one character who actually told him, oh, you must be like an old soul trapped in a kid's body? And I'm like, oh, is that why he can remember all this stuff? Yeah.
And I mean, obviously there's going to be some like freedom because it's a fictional story as well, rather than someone actually going back in and telling their life.
But it's sort of like set up his personality as a grown man rather than as a child, I found. Yeah.
Especially with those little passages like at the start, like of each chapter with everything he was kind of writing down, like that's more not talking about what was happening, but some of the things he was thinking in the present day when he's older.
Does that pattern continue in the rest of the books? Does anyone know?
Yeah, that would be interesting because like obviously it takes some of the intrigue away because you're like, oh yeah, he survives to become an old person, you know, writing scrolls and writing his history. So obviously he doesn't die.
And you're just like, damn it.
I wanted him to.
But I think as well, because there's a series called Fitz and the Fool, so I'm assuming that he's around later on in the series as well.
I'm actually keen on that one because of the Fool and not because of Fitz.
And I think there's another series called the Fool's Trilogy or the Fool series as well. It's like the third one. Yeah,
I think that's a newer one.
There's a couple with him, I think. So
cool. So just looking at our questions, did you guys have different thoughts on what the book would actually be about? Because obviously it's called An Assassin's Apprentice, and
I thought there'd be more assassination.
Yes. And apprenticing even and learning about that. Like Nevernight style.
Yeah, because I feel like with the stuff that he's learning from Jade, there is some of like the basic information. We see some of the things he learns, but not like more details about how to kill people and not examples, because there's a period where he's like, I was running around doing what the king asked of me, killing all these people. I'm like, how? Why? Who? Tell us more. Like, give us that information, please.
But it's like, no, we're trained to be assassins and we don't talk about it. We don't like kill and talk about it. I'm like, no, talk about it.
What I want to know the most.
Like, yeah, we're hearing about you cleaning out the stables. We're hearing about you like preparing dinner and like it's all the mundane stuff.
Suddenly, that summer over 3 months, I killed 17 times.
What the hell?
How did you get to be so experienced and we know nothing about?
I'm sorry, you killed 17 people and this is the first we're hearing of it?
I know. That aggravated me a great deal.
Just false advertising. And yet we hear about him sweeping the bloody like kitchen out and
right. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was disappointing.
We did see his first kill though, because I think Paige mentioned that was the Forge people. So we did see his first kill when he was like where Galen dropped him near the Forge city, and then he was like killing people because that was after Barrett had been attacked and his what was it called? What was the dog at the time that got stabbed? Anyway, that was traumatizing. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So he went a bit of a rampage and killed people. So we saw that, but not like the sneaky assassinations, like with all of like the politics behind it.
No.
Going on these missions.
I got really annoyed with him, with how cocky he was being when he's like, so I'm here to tell you to sip the poison. I'm here to tell you to drink this wine. And then I'm like, what are you doing, you fool? Like, obviously.
He was trying to find a loophole to not actually kill him, and then he ended up being tricked anyway, and that all of the wine was being was poisoned, so he was yeah.
I was so frustrated because I'm like, dude, just stop. Like, you're not gonna you're not gonna beat all these like freaking conniving adults.
There was literally no way for him to get out of that.
No.
But I mean, at the same time, because there was no way, he was, I guess, doing like the best thing, like the only thing that he could really think of. But someone did also mention in the comments, Lauren said, I feel like I know nothing about the Forged. Right?
Yeah,
pretty much. Answer. Where are our
Until this moment, I forgot that they were in the book.
I know. It feels like they were put there as such a big part, and then we don't get any inkling of what is going on here. Like, I understand that's probably going to be answered later on, but that just seemed to be such a big part of what was going on in the world and such a big issue that we don't get it. We don't understand. We do not understand.
It's back to the lack of building of the magic. I think is it a magic thing? Is it a psychological thing? Do they just have like PTSD from something that we've never heard of?
It's like all the important parts that we really wanted to know about, like about the magic, the skill, the forge, that was all missing. But then it's like, I'm going to go to the markets, and the markets are full of like 17 spices, and they sell like these fabrics. I'm like, do we need to know this?
Oh no. Okay, so Brielle says you have to read all 3 books to know about the forge, and Wedler says, Paige, the answer only comes in the 3rd book, and I didn't think it was enough.
Okay, I feel like I'm going to read spoilers because I can't put myself through this.
That's very sad to hear that we're not going to get a very satisfying closure with the answer there.
Has anyone actually like read the entire series? Like, do we have to read? Yeah.
I'm curious about people watching if you've read more than Assassin's Apprentice, and if you've read not just this trilogy, the Farseer trilogy, but any of the other series as well. Because I feel like there's a few people that have continued on, but I'm curious about the extent to which people have read from this world.
Yeah, because
the 3rd series. Cool.
Because don't get me wrong, I actually really loved her writing. Like, I thought it was like written so well, and she developed the other characters and the world building as part of her writing. Like, it was a lot of showing, not telling. So I was keen on that.
I just love that.
I just didn't like bits.
Yeah. And for those of you that have read more, I'd be curious about what your favorite series from what you've read so far is. I'm assuming that I've heard generally that this isn't necessarily the best series that she's written. But I'd be curious what your faves are.
Opinions on Regal, guys.
He's just a frustrating character.
I really wanted to see his reckoning, but it didn't happen.
I know, it wasn't very satisfying.
No.
And like, I get it because he's a prince, but also he just tried to kill the king in waiting. Surely there's more punishment that can be done here.
Yeah.
Conspiracy! Like, it really does make me question Shrewd's involvement in all of this, and that is kind of alluded to at the end of the book, but just the fact that not much is really done is Regal, and it's all just kind of brushed under the rug, and then it was going on about how Verity just kind of ignored it after a little while and didn't.
Oh, man. Yeah. They're an interesting
wrapped up a little nicely in not a good way. Yeah.
So what were your favorite? Who was your favorite character, guys?
The Fool.
Yes.
Surprise.
Oh, Lady Patience.
I did like Lady Patience. I
just want to see more of her, and the Fool actually. But yeah, it was just nice seeing a really kind of more prominent female character, even though she wasn't introduced until later on, and she was a very interesting one. Because I thought her attitude towards Fitz was really interesting, because obviously she's got some conflicted feelings with the fact that it's her late husband's bastard son, and she wasn't able to produce an heir for chivalry, but it was really refreshing, because obviously there's going to be some animosity there. So there's going to be a little bit of hatred, but it was really refreshing seeing that that's not the entirety of her attitude towards him. Like, she was still trying to teach him things and trying to better him as a person and teach him skills. So it was really interesting seeing that relationship, and I'm curious to see how things progress with that as well.
Yeah, my favorite was definitely Nosy and Smithy.
Oh man,
I'm so heartbroken.
So sad. Oh.
But I did like the Fool and Burridge if I was to pick human characters.
Burridge's relationship with Fitz was also really interesting. Very complex, especially since Fitz thought that Burridge had killed Nosy for the longest time.
Yeah, but he sort of like proves himself with how he still looks after him, especially when you see the rest of the characters and how they treated Fitz as well. That was really interesting. And then you're like, hey, Burridge actually isn't a bad guy. Yeah.
Like, he's not necessarily the most warm character, but he's still trying to do what he can for Fitz, even if he doesn't know how to really show it sometimes.
Yeah. And one thing I found interesting was the way marriage was portrayed in the book, especially for, like, I read a lot of YA, especially YA fantasy, and it's always like, you know, the prince and the princesses are going to marry for love and they find their significant other. But in this one, it's, you know, they marry for political gain, and like that felt a lot more realistic to me in a sense.
And I really liked how it's not the first male heir that will, like, become the ruler type thing. Like, if you're a female and you're the firstborn, you're the first in line to take over.
Yeah, and there was even that, who was it that, I can't remember who it was, but she married like a guy that was much older than her, but they're like, oh, they managed to work it out because it's like a non-physical and non-intimate relationship, but obviously they both get something out of that. And I found,
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I found like that was like Robin Hobb's like female writing coming through, because in every single other fantasy book, if there's like an old guy married to a younger bride, obviously you know what's going to happen. So that was interesting.
I feel like there probably was some, because it alludes to the fact that he probably can't satisfy her in a physical way because he's so much older. So he's just like trying to buy her love by gifting her everything.
Els, you look like you want to say something.
I'm very curious about this, this thoughtful face.
I guess I'm thinking about marriage as a political construct in history. So there's a lot of historical evidence to suggest an imbalance of power. And but there's also stuff like, so I think when I read this relationship in the book, I read it as this was done because of a political thing. She agreed to it because it elevated her in a social sense. He agreed to it because it elevated him in a social sense. In a way, it's like, oh, you have this young, pretty wife. And that'll, I don't know. I did think it was quite interesting, but also frustrating, that she became a political tool in her own way. So when Fitz was feeding her all these suggestions about how to approach the people and what sort of comments to make to her husband, that was all politically motivated to try and gain them favor in a way. And I can't remember specifically who it ended up benefiting aside from them, but the fact that the lines that Fitz fed to her were fed to him by someone else felt like her role was pretty much the same as Fitz.
Yeah.
Being
except
a pawn.
that she gained that role through her sexuality or her presentation of sexuality. Even if there was no physical relationship in the marriage, she was a status symbol because she was young and beautiful and theoretically could act as a sexual being. Like no matter what happened behind closed doors, the fact that they were married was a status thing for him and for her. So yeah, I think I need to mull this over a lot more. But I was frustrated by her, I think, because at that point, aside from Molly, is pretty much the only woman we've seen Fitz spend any time with for more than 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And she was just another tool.
I quite liked Molly actually, because I found like she gave Fitz like actual human friendship as opposed that sounds like, weird.
Well, no, it is true though, because like
yeah.
Because all the people he knows are using him, they're adults or like some of the other stable boys who just don't care for him or openly dislike him, so he doesn't really have a more connection that's not with an authority figure.
Yeah, authority figures to him as well.
Yeah.
Like they're not necessarily holders of authority. They're older than him. They're theoretically wiser than him.
Exactly.
Everyone.
It was weird because when he meets Molly, he's actually like, I don't know how old he was at that time, like maybe 10 or something.
Yeah, still quite young.
Yeah, but I'm like, is it possible to, have an attachment with someone at that age of that type? And then I wondered if that was a bit of the older Fitz injecting his thoughts and opinions on meeting Molly at the time and how it made him feel today. Yeah.
Interesting.
I feel like we just can't answer that question because we're all women.
No. It's a bit of a weird one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it is. There's of course the age-old argument of nature versus nurture, and we're looking at this now as adults and going, was this his adult voice remembering what it was like to be friends with her and applying other feelings to that, not knowing for certain how the male psyche develops when it comes to relationships. Obviously we can't say, but I'm sure we all had very close friendships when we were 10 years old, and we looked at those friendships and went, I love this person and I will be with them forever. Even if it wasn't necessarily an actively romantic attachment from Fitz's end, maybe he still has an understanding that relationships between men and women often end in either a romantic attachment or the fallacy of a romantic attachment in a political marriage. So maybe his attitude towards Molly is not necessarily romantic, but it's made with the understanding that that's how relationships between men and women are supposed to be.
You just made me think of something else, because now that I look at it, everyone in Fitz's life, there's no one who's together because of love. So so where would he form that type of it is nature versus nurture, isn't it? That's really interesting.
So that's another thing I'd be really interested to see in later books, because yeah, every single relationship that Fitz has is, aside from Molly, essentially, is based around this imbalance of power and the fact that he's a kid who doesn't know anything.
Yeah.
So
we've got a few people talking about how slow the story was, and I know. What did you guys think of that?
Well, I guess it's kind of why I felt like it was a foundational one, and like kind of briefly touched upon it towards the start. There is a lot of like the world building and going into the political stuff. So I feel like it is really setting up for things. So I can understand why it would come across as slow. It's not necessarily my favorite thing about the book. I would have liked to see more action, because towards the end things do pick up, where there's like that whole thing with Fitz having to assassinate this person, and like, you know what happens at the end. I forgot the name because I was listening to the audiobook very fast. So yeah, I would have liked to see a little bit more of that earlier on in the book, and I think that could have come through if we'd seen some more of the assassinating that he did whilst at Buckkeep. But yeah, I do wish it was more fast-paced, but I understand why.
For myself, I found like returning to this world just felt so depressing, and you know, there's like glimmers of hope as you're reading, but it's quickly taken away and the spark's taken out, and like I had to really force myself to keep going, because you know, you've got Fitz's dialogue in your head, you've got animals dying, you've got people being mean to him. I'm like, if it wasn't for this book club, I probably wouldn't have finished it because it was so slow and depressing.
Yeah.
I have to say, I like a slow burn book. I like a slow burn book, but it has to be done well, and it has to be done in a way that continues to be engaging. And that's often tricky in fantasy, because the audience for so many of these things are the people who love A Song of Ice and Fire, who want dragons and death and battles all the time. And whereas I look at that and go, actually, the human condition is fascinating because people are awful, and the way they get
yeah,
it's a really interesting study, especially in fiction. So the way in which we construct fictional characters and then study them. So the pacing, yeah, I actually didn't have a problem with that, because the other thing is, as a foundational book and as a book that's very clearly trying to emulate the fantasy writers of the 80s, it is actually still engaging, even though we're jumping, a 10-year period across the book. There are so many books that cover long periods of time that just have really dramatic jumps. And one big example of this is one of my least favorite books in the world, Magician by Raymond E. Feist. There is like a 40-year time jump, a quarter of the way in.
Wow.
Jesus.
Also, I mean, I might be exaggerating. It's been many years, but there is a really dramatic jump, and I just couldn't deal with it, because suddenly all of the development and the time we'd spent getting to know these young characters was gone, because we were expected to just jump into their adult psyche instead of there. So I feel like one of the good things about this book about Assassin's Apprentice was that even though there was the occasional time jump, it wasn't so dramatic that we lost the thread of where Fitz's headspace was at. And it wasn't so dramatic that we were suddenly, like, I was reading a book a couple of weeks ago where the first half of the book, the main character is 11. The second half of the book, the main character is 16. But there's nothing to indicate this time jump until, like, 3 chapters into the second half, where they're like, so how old are you now? Oh, I'm 16. And I'm just there going, really? But you still read like an 11-year-old. So I feel like the development and that headspace and the pacing was actually really good, because by the time we got to the end of the book, I wasn't still going, you're a 5-year-old kid.
Yeah.
So I did actually quite like that about the book.
Fabulous.
I think we're a few minutes off from wrapping up. So.
Yeah, I think so. If there's any other questions that you guys had, definitely send them through and we'll try and answer as many with our remaining time.
But like while we're waiting for those, I have a couple of things. So this book was published in 1995. There's another book that was published.
I'll be back.
That was released by a man with a female main character that is not terrible. And you should read it if you haven't already.
Oh, I really want to read that one.
I'm just gonna like throw book recs at you while we're waiting for those questions. I absolutely love the Old Kingdom trilogy, which is now like 5 books. Hooray!
Yes.
So definitely give Sabriel a try, because it's a great example, bouncing off this one, of a book that was published in the same year that doesn't have all of the problems.
Wow.
I love that series.
The one I found for you is so this is The Innocent Mage by Karen Miller. So she is a female high fantasy author, and I'm really interested to see. She's actually Australian. I'm really interested to see if anyone picks these up, how they feel the treatment of women operates in this one as well, because this one was published in 2005. Mm-hmm. So this is fairly recent compared to the others. But yes, because there are so few female high fantasy authors and there are so few who publish under female names, I'm really interested to see how the group how the group finds the voices change and the way. Yeah. So those are my book recs of the day.
Well, we do have a book club where we have to pick a monthly read. So speaking of which,
I really think we should do this at some point, because aside from the fact that it's a really good series, I think there's a lot of people, we've sort of hit a point where a lot of people who are fantasy readers, it was before their time, so they haven't necessarily got to it.
No.
But it's a really good.
I remember when I was younger, I would always go to the bookstore and I would see Sabriel and I'm like, oh, this looks cool, but I just never picked it up. And I wish I had, but I'm also really glad that I read it now, because I don't think it didn't, like, the characters, I don't know. I think when I was younger, I thought the characters were probably a bit younger as well. So I started it being like, oh, they're probably, maybe this is more of a middle grade, but it wasn't.
Yeah. No. Well, yeah, because Garth writes middle grade as well.
Exactly, because I'd read the Keys to the Kingdom series, so I thought it'd probably be similar age group. But it was older than I expected, and I'm really glad that I read it when I did now, because I really, really appreciated it. I really loved those books. They're so good.
Okay, do we have questions?
Someone has asked, I thought Paul was an adult much older than Fitz, but I realised that they're the same age. Interesting.
Well, because this is another thing when Fitz asks, like, I think it's around the same time he asks if the fool is male or female. He also describes the fool as looking old but also looking young, like there's a timeless look to him. He can't tell how old the fool is. So I don't think we really know at this stage.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's the same as the gender thing. Like, there is no straight answer with the fool, which is why I'm so worried that it's going to...
Yeah,
he's just being tricky.
Someone actually compared him to, like, the Cheshire Cat sort of character.
And that's so interesting.
How cool is that?
Very interesting.
Cool.
That's just like, no.
So we have picked our May read, Kaz.
Yes. So for those of you that haven't guessed yet, the book that we're going to be reading in May is Lifelike by Jade Kristoff. Surprise! Yes! So this one in Australia, this is releasing May 9th. So we've still got a little time, and we'll announce like the specific dates and book meet information in the next few days or so. This one is publishing in the US on May 29th though. So I know that that's a lot later in the month, but we're going to do our live show later on in June. So you still got time to read it if you're not in Australia. Just an FYI. No, not much surprise here. But yeah, so we're aware that this is a lot later elsewhere outside of Australia. So we will give you some more time to read the book and join us for a live show later on. But it's not a huge book either, so it's not too concerning. It's not a massive one. It's not as dense as this either, so it should be a much quicker read anyway. So
yes, and it comes out in Australia on May 9th. So I don't know if we'll be discussing spoilers at all.
What do you mean?
At our book meet.
Yes, we will be discussing spoilers.
So if you guys want to get it earlier, that would be awesome.
Yeah, you guys should probably just assume that there will always be spoilers at the actual meetups.
Yes.
Yes.
Like, as we'll try to be vague for the live stream as much as possible, but for the actual meetups, there will always be spoilers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I know it's not the most ideal book, but this is one we're very excited about and wanted to jump on. So that's why we're doing it in May. So in the future, we will avoid as best as we can choosing books that might come out later on in the month, or at least do it the following month. But just this one time, this is what we're doing, and we're very excited about it. So I hope you guys are too. We will be doing some more official announcements about our May book in the next week or so. We've got a little bit of time since it doesn't come out till May 9th in Australia anyway. But yeah, we'll keep you updated with when you can get tickets to the book meets and stuff like that. And yeah, so thank you guys all so much for joining us for this live show. I'm so happy that we've started up this book club. It's very exciting. And yeah, thanks for all of the great discussions. And someone please post the name of the Rex read. Sorry, it's I'll write down the book.
There you go.
Lovely. Yes, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so thank you guys so much for your great discussions and questions and for joining us today. We will see you in about a month's time for the book meets, and then we'll let you know as well when the live show ends up being at a later point. But yeah, that's all. Yay!
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Thank
Bye.
you.